How the hell do you suppose this happened? The sheriff asked as he wiped sweat from his brow. No clue, replied the crime scene technician. She snapped pictures. Seems pretty clear he hung himself. I don't really know how long it takes a corpse to mummify. I watched the man and woman examine the dangling corpse as though I wasn't even in the room. They hadn't asked me to leave, and oddly, I didn't want to. The shock of discovering the body had long since passed, and I had instead been filled with a macabre fascination. Less than 2 hours earlier, I had stopped at the first roadside motel I had seen in hours. Traveling Route 66 had been a dream of mine for years. With the pandemic waning and my work as a copywriter not tying me down, I had taken off without much planning. Motels had been more abundant in Texas, and the eastern portion of New Mexico. But the further west I drove, the less frequently I had happened upon one. Even when I did manage to find a place with vacancies, they were often dilapidated and pretty questionable. I did my best to consider it part of the adventure, but some nights I felt better than others. When I pulled up to the crumbling stucco office at the Alabaster Springs Motor Inn, it didn't fill me with an overwhelming sense of safety. The half square of motel rooms behind the office seemed a decade past good maintenance, and the lack of cars in the parking lot told me that other travelers had thought the same. Still, it was somewhere to stay for the night. Dwarvish dirt devils swirled in front of my feet as I walked toward the door of the office. Large chunks of stucco facade sat in piles on the windowsill and peppered the foundation of the building. Electric whining filled my ears from the flashing open sign above the door. Before I entered, I could see an old man through the dirty window. A yellow tank top sagged on his bony frame. He absently swatted flies as he watched a rabbit-eared television in the corner. "Hello," I said to the man as I pushed open the door. My eyes drifted down to a lopsided name tag pinned to his shirt, identifying him as Clarence. "Any rooms available?" The slovenly man looked at me and arched an eyebrow.
"Empty parking lot should have been a clue," Clarence replied sarcastically. "Room's 50 for the night. Don't expect much. Ain't got no help no more since Davy ran off."
Not knowing who Davy was or where he had run off to, I decided to continue with my business. It was late, and my eyes felt like they had lead weights adhered to them. I approached the counter, pulled my debit card from my wallet, and set it on the counter. Clarence slid it back.
"Credit reader's busted," he said dryly. "Cash only."
I curled my lip and placed my card back into my wallet. Thumbing through my bill pocket, I could see that there were only 2 wrinkly 20s and nothing else. I fished the bills out of my wallet and held them up for the old man to see. "Only got 40, I replied. "I can Venmo you the rest later."
"That'll be enough," he spat as he snatched the cash from my hand. "Don't know what the hell a Venmo is, but you can Venmo at somebody else. Better 40 than nothing."
Tossing a set of keys attached to a maroon diamond keychain, he pointed me to room 3 to the right of the office entrance. I asked him if it had been cleaned recently, and he muttered that Davy had cleaned it before he left 6 months earlier. No one had occupied the room since. How delightful. After pulling my car in front of my room and unloading my duffel bag, I made my way to the door of room 3. Thick dust clung lazily to the surface and covered my knuckles as I slid the key into the lock. The force required to turn the deadbolt further detailed this place's lack of care. Snapping dryly from the door frame, the lock gave way, allowing the door to squeal on its hinges as it opened into the room. Stale, dry air hammered my face, and I could see dots of dust dancing in the beams from the low sun. Breathing was a laborious task in the stifling heat of the room. I tossed my bags onto a metal chair and turned on the window-mounted AC unit before stepping outside. A few minutes to let the struggling unit cool down the oven of a room seemed like my only option. Momentarily, I toyed with the idea of getting into the car and driving until I found another motel, but I had no clue how far that would be. The cell signal was abysmal out here, so relying on GPS or Google didn't seem like a safe option right now. I would chance it here for the evening, and get on the road first thing in the morning. A night of sleep in a shady motel still seemed better than falling asleep at the wheel. Once I was fairly certain the room's temperature was survivable, I headed back inside. To my surprise, it was a great deal cooler than I anticipated it would get. After returning to the room, my assessment went from irritation to amusement. It was a relic of the 1970s. Formica laminate tables and chairs, a knob-controlled TV, and wood-grain wall panels decorated my room. The carpet was matted shag, and the yellowed ceiling was covered in popcorn-style texture. I scooped my duffel bag from the ancient chair and headed to the accordion-doored closet beside the bed. Odds didn't seem in favor of a nighttime burglary, but a lifetime of city dwelling had taught me to be cautious of leaving my things sitting out in the open. Maybe my mother had a little to do with it as well. When we had traveled in my childhood, I was always made to put my belongings in the closet or dresser. The plastic handle of the fold-away door felt brittle in my hand, so I cautiously slipped my fingers around the frame to give it a push. Snapping away from the wall, the door retracted, revealing a gaunt man staring back at me. I stumbled back and threw my duffel bag at the figure as I fell to the floor. As I pushed myself back across the room, the man remained in place, but began to slowly turn around. He rocked gently from side to side, and when I looked down, I could see his feet were not touching the floor. My eyes drifted back up to his head, which had now turned around to stare at the wall of the closet. I could see a rope around the leathery skin of his neck vanish into the ceiling above. The body swayed and turned until it was facing me again. Empty eye sockets now seemed to peer in my direction. Thin wisps of hair and long, cracking nails jutted ghoulishly from the taut, papery skin. Thin veins of dried skin filled the creases in the flannel workshirt. The head drooped and the open jaw rested on its chest in a silent scream. A syringe dangled haphazardly from the man's left arm. As the body began to turn again, the left foot made contact with my duffel bag, causing the body to jerk. Something fell from the body and slid down the side of my bag. The sudden motion from the dangling corpse startled me from my trance, and I bolted up from the floor and ran out of the room toward the office to call the police. After taking pictures of the swinging cadaver, the sheriff and crime scene technician retrieved a wallet from the hanging man's back pocket. The driver's license inside identified the man as David Weldon Shell. The old man from the office, Clarence, identified him by his clothing and a withered tattoo on his arm. Davy was Clarence's son. He told the sheriff that Davy had a history of substance abuse, and he had always assumed he skipped town to escape drug debts. Men had stopped by periodically asking for his son, and when they learned he had disappeared, they inquired about his current whereabouts. Clarence always disappointed them and sent them on their way. I stared in awe the entire time. My life had been an easy one. There were no great traumas to share and no stories of tragedy. My heart swelled with sympathy for the man the newly arrived EMTs were placing in a body bag. I couldn't help but consider this difficult road he had traveled in his life that led him to this. After the earthly remains of David Shell had been placed in the ambulance, the sheriff offered me a ride to the nearest motel down the road. I thanked him, but told him I didn't want to leave my car behind. He nodded understandingly and jotted the directions to the new motel on a sheet of paper from his notepad. I entered the room a final time to retrieve my duffel bag. Fortunately, I hadn't taken anything else into the room, so my departure was swift. With the door pulled shut behind me, I walked to my car and tossed the bag in the back seat, before heading to the office to return my key. When I entered the office, Clarence was staring intently at the TV, fly swatter in hand, just like I had found him when I arrived. He didn't seem upset in the least about the discovery of his son's mummified remains in room 3. "I'm sorry about Davy," I said to Clarence as I placed my key on the counter.
"Don't spend too much time weeping over some deadweight junkie," he responded without looking at me. "Don't weep over your $40 neither. Just because you didn't stay don't mean you get a refund."
His response startled me almost as much as finding the dead man in my closet. I couldn't understand how anyone could speak that way about their dead child. Feeling disgusted, I turned to walk back into the stifling night air. "Hey," Clarence exclaimed as I was opening my car door. He now stood in the doorway of the office.
You find anything interesting in there after you saw Davy?
What do you mean? I asked. The old man rolled his eyes.
Just any damn interesting thing, you dimwit,
he barked. I threw up my middle finger at Clarence and settled into my car. He turned his head back into the office and slammed the door. Relief filled me as I pulled onto the road. That would lead me back to Route 66 and hopefully a nicer motel. A few days later, I made it to Santa Monica, but the destination had lost its appeal. After the grim discovery hanging in my motel closet, I hadn't been able to enjoy anything. None of the sights had any luster. Food made me feel nauseous. And even the softest bed made me toss and turn in my sleep. So I decided to go home. The sun was setting beyond the horizon as my tires rumbled down the road. I could see the green sign with white letters, showing the turn ahead that led back to Alabaster Springs. An ironwood tree stood vigil behind the sign, and its thin branches rubbed back and forth over the top of it. My headlights kicked on in response to the low light, and the beams illuminated the skeletal fingers of the tree. It seemed to almost reach down towards the road. A lump raised in my throat, and my stomach dropped, as I saw something swinging from the largest branch. David Shell's hollow eyes met mine as he swayed in the breeze. Noose knotted around the ironwood branch. His skeletally thin arm pointed toward the road leading to Alabaster Springs. I slammed on the brakes and my car slid into a shallow ditch. My heart hammered against my chest. The engine had died when the tires left the pavement, and I tried desperately to restart it. Over my shoulder, I could hear rhythmic tapping against my window, and looked back to see Davy's boot bumping against it. In a panic, I threw my door open and ran to the other side of the road before I tumbled into the shifty dust. As I regained my footing, I stumbled backward and gazed at my car and the ironwood tree behind it. Davy was gone. A single, low tree branch tapped against the rear window of my car. I vomited onto the pavement. It ran down my face and dripped onto my shirt. Tears welled in my eyes from the acidity in my mouth and the stench from my clothing. Wearily, I glanced at the tree again, but Davy was nowhere to be seen. I staggered back to my car and opened the back door. Rifling through my duffel bag, I pulled out a clean t-shirt to replace the soiled one I was wearing. After putting on the new shirt, I folded up the dirty one and slid it into the outside pouch of my bag. As my hand slid into the pouch, it bumped against something rigid. I grabbed the item and pulled it out to examine it. It was a maroon diamond keychain from the motel, with 2 bronze keys on the silver ring. Turning it over in my hand, I could see the writing. On one side, it said the Alabaster Springs Motor Inn, and on the other, "If found, please return to the office." Memories of Clarence and his contempt for his son filled my mind, and I drew back my arm to throw the keys out into the dusty field. "Take them back," whispered a voice. It sounded as though it came from the ironwood tree. I turned to look at it again, but there was no one there. Just my imagination. I drew my hand back once again to throw the keys into the distance, when something grasped my shoulder and spun me around.
"Take them back!"
screamed the voice from before. Davy stood before me, hollow eye sockets staring at me. He was in the center of the road, still pointing towards Alabaster Springs. The rope still hung from his neck, and the needle dangled from his outstretched arm.
"Please."
Without another thought, I jumped into the seat of my car and turned over the engine. I smashed the gas pedal to the floor and aimed the car on the road to Alabaster Springs. In my rearview mirror, I could see the diminishing figure of Davy standing in the road next to the ironwood tree, still pointing. After a half hour of driving, I could see the dingy road sign for the Alabaster Springs Motor Inn ahead. The parking lot sat as empty as the first time I had seen it, and the light in the office glowed in contrast to the dark of the evening. Unlike my last visit, Clarence was nowhere to be seen. I put my car in park and surveyed the motel for any signs of life. A light shone through the curtains of a room that I was able to recognize as the one I had previously rented. Room 3. The door was slightly ajar, casting a thin line of illumination onto the sidewalk outside. Cautiously, I approached the open door and pushed it open a few more inches. At first, I couldn't see anyone inside, but heard shuffling on the carpet. Edging the door open a few more inches, I leaned my head in to see Clarence on his hands and knees examining the closet floor. He was cursing under his breath as his head darted from side to side. "Clarence?" I said loudly. The old man bolted up and turned to look at me. His eyes squinted in an attempt to improve his failing eyesight. A sneer curled on his mouth, and I knew he recognized me.
"The hell do you want?"
he asked as he clambered to his feet.
"Here to reminisce about the good times?"
I tossed the keys to him, and to my surprise, Clarence raised his hand and caught them. The old man stared at the keys and smiled. He turned them over in his hand and began to laugh.
"Looks like you did find something after all, eh?"
he asked rhetorically.
"Now get the hell on out of here."
Clarence pointed toward the door. I had expected some word of thanks from the old bastard, but he was just as endearing now as when we had first met. Without another word, I turned to leave the room. As I rounded the corner toward my car, my path was blocked by a silhouette. Davy's withered corpse shuffled in my direction on wobbly legs. As he neared me, I attempted to move out of his path, but wasn't fast enough. A slender arm bolted from his side and wrapped around my arm before shoving me out of the way and sending me sprawling into the parking lot. I sat up on the cracking pavement and could see the terror in Clarence's eyes as the corpse turned the corner into room 3. He dropped the keys and held his hands up in a surrendering gesture as his son stumbled toward him. Clarence began to back away, but soon slammed into the wall of the closet.
"I'm sorry, boy,"
Clarence yelled.
"I needed the money and you wouldn't help me."
Davy continued lumbering forward.
"If you would have just given me a little cash, we would have been fine."
Davy removed the noose from his neck and continued on.
"Damn it, Davy,"
Clarence screeched desperately.
"I shot you up one last time. Ain't that worth anything?"
Davy's shell reached his father and grabbed the cloth of his shirt in a tight fist. The old man punched at the corpse to no effect. The corpse's free hand draped the noose around the screaming man's neck and tossed the end over the support beam at the top of the closet. Slowly, Davy began to tug the slack of the rope, and Clarence lifted from the ground.
"I should have killed you when you was just a boy,"
Clarence said, before his speech became a strangled groan. His feet thrashed and his hands grabbed desperately at the rope sinking into his neck. Davy turned away from his struggling father and picked the key ring up off the matted shag carpeting. He stumbled from room 3 toward the side of the office building, in the center of the lot. When he reached a steel hatch leading to the crawlspace beneath, he got on his knees and inserted the key. The lid squealed open and the corpse reached inside, withdrawing 2 dust-covered shoulder bags. Dragging both bags behind him, he returned to room 3 and tossed the bags below his father's feet. Crumpled wads of bills began to tumble from the unsecured packs and slide onto the floor. Clarence dangled in silence above the money he had so desperately wanted. Managing to break my trance, I darted from my car and sped out of the lot. 3 days later, I was finally back home and still reeling from the experience. I slept with the lights on for weeks and refused to open my closet. After a few weeks had passed, I worked up the nerve to look up the nearest newspaper to Alabaster Springs. There was a headline from the previous week detailing the discovery of a local motel owner who had hanged himself to death in the same room in which his son had taken his life. The article brushed casually over the big bags of money. Thankfully, there was no mention of an investigation or concerns that anyone else was involved. At the bottom of the article, there was a picture of Clarence in his younger years. He still looked hateful, and the worst part of me isn't sad that he's dead. Not sure what that says about me, but I'll have to handle that on my own. Next to him is a picture of David. Davy. He's smiling and looks happy. It's a relief to see his eyes rather than those hollow sockets. I hope he's at rest now. Tonight's story was written by Ryan Major, also known as gtrip14 on Reddit. Ryan has a new book out. It's titled I've Done This Before, A Barrage of Nightmares by Ryan Major. I just picked up my copy and been enjoying reading it. I hope you all will check out the description below, and please support Ryan and his work and his new book. Thanks everybody for listening, and hope you have a great night. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupeHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.